After a UFO sighting, witnesses have reported that mysterious men wearing dark suits and hats showed up, sometimes threatening the witnesses not to ever tell what they've seen or else. If you thought Men in Black was just a movie, there's a whole historic record that goes back to the 60s, 50s, maybe even much further back than anyone ever considered before. Some of the strangest stories we have uh, in history and I think maybe it's one of the deeper rabbit holes that you could get into. I mean, it doesn't really end. You just keep finding weirder things and you just start wondering what's going on because I don't think that the 1940s or the 50s is where all of this started.
I mean, the phenomena covers a sort of a broad range, probably a range that most people don't know about, which we're going to go into because the phenomena can vary. Um, but to me, my first experience of understanding the Men in Black was through John Keel's work, who was an investigator in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, who coined high strangeness, who coined the term Men in Black, and he was the primary paranormal investigator behind the Mothman, and wrote the book Mothman Prophet. Like, what the heck are these things, and what are they doing? What's their purpose? As opposed to like this thing that goes and warns people, like, you know, don't talk about your UFO sighting. Bad things will happen to you.
Which
That's
yeah,
I
which
don't, yeah. Go
it's
ahead.
weird. That's weird enough in and of itself. But then
Well, I don't know. Is it? I mean, that's like the government does not want people, especially like when you get back
yes,
into the 60s and stuff, 70s, and earlier than that, that they were really trying to keep a lid on that stuff. And if there was something going on, I think that they would have been more apt to warn people, individually. No internet, people couldn't talk about it very much in general. It's like a scary person shows up at your house, tells you not to talk about it, you probably won't.
the strange thing I think about a lot of the stories is that it gets a little bit outside what you would consider to be normal government officials. It does. It goes into the land of high strangeness. I mean, when you go back and you read the original Majestic 12 documents that e- they say are untrue and this and that. I mean, you and I both know that that stuff is legit. The Majestic 12, which was uh, a group of men, I guess you could say, that kind of created the foundation for how to deal with UFO landings that were occurring in the United States back in early 20th century. We have um, things that seem to not be a part of what would be a normal human interaction between government officials and men. Uh, the documentation that I read from the Majestic 12 really was discussing how to distract people from what was going on, essentially. These are normal art of war type methods of discrediting people coming forward with stories, certain things that they could do with propaganda. I mean, we know also that Hollywood has been doing things like this. I mean, the fact that you can't even search for Men in Black without a ridiculous amount of pages of having to see Will Smith in a suit. Why is that? Of course, it's a fun story, but so many of our original weird stories have gotten hijacked by Hollywood, and then all you're seeing is that term. You're not seeing the stuff that you're actually looking for.
These movies that come out in Hollywood, is it a soft disclosure or is it hiding something else?
If the story is already out there and it's fictional, the reality won't shock people as much, and they won't even pay attention to it. John Keel really was the first guy to really start putting things together on this.
Because the Men in Black is a generic term. It doesn't cover just the Men in Black in black Cadillacs who arrive at the scene of UFO incidents. As I'll describe to you later, there are all kinds of Men in Black. They're mystery men, and we don't know who they are, where they come from, or who's supporting them. And some of these people apparently have a lot of logistical support and financial support that's very mysterious.
what he is saying, and from the original source, it's interesting, is a lot different than some of the encounters that we've heard with this like pale skin, hairless, threatening tall men dressed in a suit. Sometimes the suits are off, or they don't fit quite right, or they're dressing in the 1940s and it's the 80s and things like
Right.
that.
Some
They're
of them were
showing up
really
in
short too. Some of them were really short, like under 5 feet, like 4 feet 6, 4 feet 3.
weird,
Some of them were
really.
very short. Yeah. One of the things is that they would mostly all wear the same kinds of shoes with big soles and waffled kind of soles. So that was something that people had noticed about these characters. Black Cadillacs, pull up in a black Cadillac.
Yeah, an old black Cadillac.
That was in pristine condition, like 30-year-old car or something from the time that, 30, 40-year-old car, pristine condition.
Most commonly in our lore, men in black are considered to be these pale individuals, with very white skin, tall, strange looking, hairless. One of the things that John Keel kept saying over and over is that not only were the people that he was interviewing saying that they looked angular, slightly Asian, not Asian, slightly Asian, almost like a cross between white the white race and the Asian race put together. And he used the example of the Lapland people in northern Sweden. These were the type of people that experiencers were claiming that they had been seeing.
And so some of the Men in Black stuff. Now there is a contingent of Men in Black stuff that is truly anomalous, truly high strangeness. But then a lot of it around it is not.
Mm.
Is basically a psyop, or it's being used as a cover for intelligence agencies to run with.
Yes. Yeah. I think maybe we should get into a few of the more famous stories just to kind of
Hmm.
hash it out a little bit, because there's some notable stories here, and some that people even haven't talked about, that go back as far as I think 1665, that we need to talk about, because I think all of these are have the same context and they're a mystery. You have to understand that most people think that the Men in Black started around the 1940s or the 1950s. Okay, that they travel in threes. They're strange. They probably coincide with the Roswell landings, and that all of this is coming from some type of bizarre governmental agency, right? But there are historical accounts where you may question that narrative. In uh, September 4th, 1665, there were villagers in Massingham. I believe this is in Britain somewhere. Okay. Everybody sees these lights in the sky. Nobody knows what's going on, right? After this, three strangers appeared in the village the next day. They were all very pale skinned, and they were dressed head to toe in black. These three men started to ask questions to the villagers about what people had seen in the sky, right? Now, because it was such a small population and you would get interrogated when you go there, one of these guys starts to interrogate one of these men in black who's questioning them. Immediately, the guy is crippled by some unknown force, and he felt like the inside of his head was filling up with water. He couldn't move, which is a strange way to describe what was happening to you. So basically, shocked patrons who were observing this emptied out into the courtyard. One stranger basically said, this guy, they came in, right? Said, "Speak no more of what you have witnessed in the sky yesterday evening." Then, after this, the three of them just start walking back towards the woods, where the woods are, away from the village, and disappear into the woods. Okay. Every person in this village, the way it's described is like any man who could walk basically starts looking for these three guys with weapons because obviously they attacked one of the villagers, and you don't do that in this village, right? And no one could find them. They escaped or disappeared into the woods. And for as long as the history of that village went on, they would always call that the Day of the Warlocks,
Huh.
something to that effect.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's strange. Now, there's a story from the same year on the English-Scottish border, and that claimed that two pale-skinned, darkly clad men attacked a farm after being unsatisfied with the recollections of a shooting star earlier that month. So just a few months earlier, there was another sighting in the sky, and these pale guys showed up at this farmer's home and started to bully them about what they saw. But there was an occurrence in Britain between the early 1800s, very early, like 1800 to 1803 ish, to about 1880, where people in London were seeing something they called spring-heeled Jack. And I've told you about him before, but we never really got into it. And this rabbit hole with the Men in Black brought me back to spring-heeled Jack, because what was so strange about this entity, I don't know what to call it, guy screwing around and trolling people, or an actual serious uh specter of some sort, is that he dressed in a very refined black cloak, and when he would show up people's houses and demand something, people couldn't necessarily always see his face. They thought he was a police officer.
Right.
And then he would do strange things like assault people. And then the reason why they called him Spring-Heeled Jack is he would literally jump 9 feet into the air onto a roof to escape, which obviously is not something a normal person does, right? And then fast forward, let's just say, to around 1947, June 21st, 1947, we have Harold Dahl, who honestly could have been the case that inspired the Men in Black movies. Harold Dahl, there's basically two harbor patrolmen, Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman, and Dahl's young son, and they were all boating on Puget Sound when they saw what they described as 6 donut-shaped flying machines, which spewed out a great quantity of a slag-like substance. One piece of this slag killed Dahl's dog. Another injured the boy's arm because there was a child on board with them, and the boat was badly damaged by this barrage. This incident did not even appear in the papers until several days later, but the very next morning, before Dahl and this guy Chrisman really had a chance to spread their tale at all, a late model car pulled up in front of Dahl's house, and a mysterious stranger joined them for breakfast. And when I say join them, this guy was trying to get into his house, and one of the stories I heard was he didn't want to let this weirdo into his house, so he's like, let's just go to a diner down the street or whatever. They all go to a diner, and Dahl said that the man was about 40 years old. He's wearing a dark business suit, sat down, told Dahl precisely what happened that day. Okay, so this guy who's sitting down with Dahl is telling him precisely what happened that day, almost as if he had been there. And then he very sternly warns these guys to keep quiet about the whole affair if they value their jobs and family. Now, the
Right.
guy doesn't even identify himself. Dahl never sees the guy again. U.S. Air Force did not formally set up any kind of UFO investigating project until several months later. We know that from documentation. Hundreds of people in this Tacoma, Seattle area reported sightings in the following days after this incident, but it was branded the Maury Island hoax because much of the slag fell onto Maury Island. 3 days after the incident, private pilot Kenneth Arnold sighted 9 flying discs near Mount Rainier, and he's credited with focusing national attention on the presence of flying saucers in the sky, not doll. Okay, here's probably the second most famous case, I think, around Men in Black, by Albert Bender. This is in 1952, a few years after this event. He is a former U.S. Air Force serviceman turned author and amateur ufologist. His name's Albert K. Bender. He set up an organization called the International Flying Saucer Bureau to investigate and report on strange UFO activity being witnessed all over the world at that time. He started publishing a weekly newsletter to it grew really fast. It was almost about 2,000 people worldwide. And in early 1953, Bender suddenly mysteriously shut down the newspaper, which was really weird because the guy was going full tilt on this. He was going to create the first of its kind UFO conference where like-minded people could come and share stories, and it would be a yearly annual thing. He's starting to ramp up what he's saying in his newsletters, explaining that he's going to reveal many amazing things at this conference. And then just like that, all of a sudden, he publishes the final newsletter, and it has this message that says, "We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious." Of course, there was more to the message, but that was the final sentence in it, which is obviously strange. And then his colleagues were saying that there was very odd demeanor by him at the time, where he seemed like he was getting very agitated and nervous, like someone scared the heck out of him. He was pretty determined to kind of keep going. So even though he was getting all kinds of messages and things that he should stop, he kind of just was like, let me just keep doing this. Let me keep going, And he started suffering from unbearable headaches around this event. And it doesn't make any sense because the dude was extremely healthy. He's in his 30s at the time, right? And he's not functioning properly, right? At first, no one knows why he stopped this entire thing, right? Then, basically 10 years later, he finally opens up and he explains what happened. And he said that he was visited by 3 men in black who appeared basically out of thin air, forced himself into his home, and warned him not to continue his work on the UFOs.
I mean, even today, like you just sent me something, actually. It was a podcast that shut down, that decided it was going to have its last episode, and basically outing certain people in the field who are basically all controlled by government on the so-called disclosure, and saying that they, realize now that this whole thing is a controlled theater operation of disclosure by the government, and that it's very dangerous and very dark. And that's how it's always been within the UFO world. It's always been that way. It's always been very dangerous if you get to a certain place. Always. People have disappeared. People have died, literally by the hands of the people that hold this in the highest level of classification. Those are the people. Those are actually the people that you have to be worried about if you get too close to reality and truth on this and you have a large audience. You have to, right? So now what's happening is that the Disclosure World Project is trying to contain and control and take over the narrative and pull it away from people like us, from other people who are doing legitimate research. Because in the past, it was like, I'm just going to make a newsletter and I'm going to advertise the newsletter in the back of newspapers across the country or something, right? In magazines. Sign up for the UFO Newsletter Guild, right? Send me your stories, stuff like that, And so, like, someone like John Keel, for instance, was putting all these pieces together and seeing patterns across the country because of doing things like this and being a reporter and getting contacts. And that was the internet, in a sense, back then. That was the networking. Right. And so these people were more small, they were like in a smaller world and they were more isolated. Now you have a lot of people focusing on it. So if the government can throw in these stories, these red herrings, and then control the narrative and take people down, which you can do on the internet because voices get very loud and they can be pushed by algorithms, then they can control it.
Yep.